If anyone's ever read the book Range by David Epstein, he talks about the importance of playing a number of different sports as you grow up and how they may all benefit each other to ultimately become good at one. The obvious example given there is Roger Federer, in contrast to Tiger Woods, who focused just on that one sport but still made it through. We hear an awful lot of examples of different people who had this broad range of influences, interests and activities they took part in. Today's guest, Peter Shaw, is coming near the end of his PhD studies, where he's looked at multi-sport youth athletes. He's studied more than 300 different players from ages 13 to 18 to see what are the benefits, barriers, drawbacks and positives from playing a number of sports, to see what we can do, what they can benefit from each other, but also where some of the kinks in the chain occur that stop from playing 2, 3, 4 or more sports. Really interesting conversation where we look at the benefits, but also see what's happening currently to stop some people being more active and what we can do to encourage more adolescents getting far more benefits from the sports they play and how they can potentially play more. Straight with the hard question. Petey, multi-sport youth athletes, should they play a variety of sports or not?
In short, yes. And I think it is probably well known this stage, if you're involved in sport or you're a parent that has, kids that are involved in sport, the multi-sport space or the sport sampling stuff is becoming more and more, evidence-based, and the specialization stuff on the other end of it is kind of getting a lot of negative feedback. I suppose for me, the biggest issue with multisport in this country, and I suppose for anyone that's listening, the context within Ireland is significantly different to the typical context you would have in, for example, the US, where they would have seasonal sports. There's certain times of the year where you're not allowed to play other things, and it kind of allows the multisport person to sample into different things and to play competitively at different times of the year. For us in Ireland, it has now, in my experience, in the cohort that I've researched and that I work with on a daily basis, it has become very messy. And there's a few elements to that. One is the competition administration is, in some instances, and there's evidence to support this, that they are putting fixtures in place over longer periods of time to try and attract from other sports. There's also, I suppose, the increase in the professionalism within all of the sports. So mainly the sports that I've researched in the studies that I've done are Gaelic football, hurling, soccer, rugby, basketball, athletics, and then there's a load of other ones that were kind of smaller sample sizes. But the majority of those sports are pulling from the same athletes. And it's that kind of age-old question, is like, are you a multi-sport athlete because you are good at sport? As in, are your fundamental movement skills really, really good? And that's why John Murphy goes, I seen him play soccer the other day, I'm going to get him down to the hurling club. Or I seen him playing hurling, I'm going to get him to play it because he has good fundamental movement skills and he's a good athlete. Or do you have good fundamental movement skills because you played multi-sport? It's an interesting one. Is it the kind of chicken and the egg? And I just find at the moment there is so much diversity going on in sport, and there's so much competition and training for those athletes. It's becoming really, really difficult to be a multi-sport athlete. It's not just as simple as when we were younger, when you're a teenager and you just kind of play Gaelic hurling in the summer, the championship ends, then you go play your winter sports, whatever it is, soccer, rugby, and then you come around, you do your winter training for your GA, and then you go back into the summer again. All of these, particularly in Dublin, are morphing into one season, making it very, very tricky in terms of sports clashing, scheduling. Every kind of sport that I mentioned there as well is now very professional in terms of their GA Academy has an S&C program that they've never had before. Your school sport now has Leaving Cert P, where they have a gym and you're doing a resistance training program for them. So you now could have, I've had some of the participants in my study are playing 2 to 7 sports per week and involved in over 10 training programs, which is, multi-sport is great, no doubt about it. There is numerous benefits, but there comes a point here where we have to educate and we have to actually go, what is the end goal here? And if the end goal is we want as many as possible for as long as possible, it isn't going to be that simple. And we're kind of looking at a situation where, like for me, I would love any athlete that I coach at the moment in for example, rugby, to be able to make that decision on their terms. To be able to say, I still enjoy my sport. I'm still playing multiple sports. But I realise now I've been given good advice that now is probably the time that I need to start to focus in. And in a long-winded way, yes, it is good to play multi-sport to answer your question, but it's so nuanced, John. It's so complex at the moment. And like even my supervisory team, we're talking about sub-classifications at the moment and different categories of the multi-sport athlete, because it's no longer I'm single sport, I'm multi-sport. It just doesn't work like that anymore.
Yeah, no, I'm glad it's nuanced. That's why I have you on, so we can talk a bit more about it. I expected scheduling to be one of the biggest issues and the clashes of sports times, everything that way. Is there a particular age or age range where it tends to come to a bit of a head?
We studied about 300 participants that played multiple sports, so they had to play 2 or more sports. And the number one challenge that they face, that they report back to us as really, really stressful, is the sports clashing. And these are 13 to 18 year olds. The research that we had, there was over 180 of these athletes were 14. Now, at 14, I don't know about you, but I was playing absolutely everything I could. The drop off in our study from 14 year olds that were playing multiple sports to 15 was drastic. Like as in, it was off a cliff. So there is something happening between 14 and 15 that really, really is important. And for me, there's a few bits that I suppose you could speculate now, getting near the end of the prof doc, of what they could be. I suppose in Ireland, you're looking at the Féile is a huge competition in GA that's going to start to come into play. You're looking at players start to play up an age group. Particularly in Dublin, a good 14-year-old hurler footballer is starting to look to play up age groups. Similar in soccer. In rugby, particularly in the school that I work where the principal sport of the college is rugby in a private rugby school, you're looking at the Junior Cup is the main competition. If you've ever seen that, it is a very intense program. It's almost like a mini professional rugby team at times. And those players are playing at 15 up into an under 16 bracket, and it becomes decision time. For some of them, they try and keep it all going. For others, there's huge concern amongst parents about injury risk. The fact that, for example, I had one player who was playing League of Ireland soccer, playing Junior Cup rugby, trying to play playing Senior Cup rugby and trying to play minor inter-county football, all at the one season. And for anybody that kind of says, research-wise, multi-sport is brilliant, in this case, it was detrimental. It was really, really tough to manage. It required a huge amount of stakeholder support. It required a huge amount of parental education and kind of collaboration with each of those kind of organisations and coaches. And to be honest, it's probably unsustainable unless you have a professional strength and conditioning coach in each of those kind of organisations to try and manage that person's workload. For me, I think if you look at like the research, what I would be kind of suggesting to parents that love their son or daughter playing multiple sports is from 6 to 12 years, and this is Cote's work, this is not my work, this is the developmental sport participation model. It's been there for years and it still kind of stands up to the test of time in different contexts. In Ireland, it definitely kind of stacks up. You're looking at that sampling period of 6 to 12 years where they're playing 3 to 4 sports. And the key part for me, and we'll talk about the experience later on of youth sport, the play practice ratio, you're looking at about 80% play and 20% like that structured kind of practice scenario. When they get to kind of 13 to 15, they start going into our secondary school, you're looking at lowering that maybe down to 2 or 3 sports. It becomes difficult now, particularly when you look at school sport and club sport now more than ever are becoming morphed. They are clashing. Both are trying to do their best in terms of we want to deliver the best possible program for whoever it is. You're now getting towards a 50-50 split where you're going, the play starts to go down a little bit, and now we start to introduce more organised training, more organised practice. So you're kind of at that 50-50 mode there. Once they get to 16 to 22, and depending on the sport, because there's obviously, early specialization sports out there that there's good research to suggest there, if you want to get to the elite, this is the way to do it, and vice versa. There is late specialization sports. There's numerous people you could talk about there, particularly in rugby, where you're lowering kind of to 1 to 2 sports at 16 to 22, and now you're getting towards, we're going to go to more organised training here. This is going to be a really structured program of kind of 80% practice and 20% play, because I don't know about you, I want to look for more play now because of all the organised training that we're doing, and it becomes monotonous, and it becomes, the amount of games that you were playing, particularly for me when it was back home in Carlow, and you're playing fixtures, and the amount of training that you were doing in comparison to that was, it was few and far between. Whereas when I played in Dublin in club hurling up here, you were playing 16 to 25 matches a season, and you're training only 1 or 2 nights a week because there just isn't the time to fit it all in. And I found it was way more enjoyable. So there is a lot to unpack there. But I definitely think that following that model is a good starting point for parents,
Yeah, circle back briefly just to the 14 age group, thinking GA wise, that's generally the age development squad start, and just even purely from logistics, they generally train on a Saturday morning because that has no impact on the club scene, but that's also when soccer and rugby matches are on. So I wonder, was that always set up to not impact the clubs, or was it also to try and force a bit of a decision there? Will you come with us, or you go and play in soccer, rugby? And we've seen a few examples in the media around where that happened, and I wonder is that a little bit of both. One thing I touched on there, I'm glad you brought up Irish context at the very start, because I know, if I'm doing a lot of PE stuff, school sport isn't a huge thing outside of Ireland. I know in America it's an industry in and of itself, but on the continent of that, school sport isn't really a thing. They have their PE program. Local clubs might use school facilities, but they don't have the representative stuff we do, which ends up being almost a doubling in activity in Ireland. Just quickly on rugby, are you allowed to play schools and club? I remember that being a thing where you weren't allowed. You weren't allowed to be a dual athlete that way. Say particularly in the Division 1 schools or that.
So say in rugby.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we would be, your typical big 6 that automatically qualify for the Leinster School Senior Cup. So you've got 6 schools that, would have a huge amount of investment into rugby. In those schools, from my understanding, I know in our place, you're not playing club rugby. As in, once you go into the school, that becomes, your bread and butter. You're involved there, training wise 3-4 times a week on the pitch, and you're into your strength and conditioning program and all your sort of bits that go with that. In Dublin, it is very tricky because there is so many people in a small dense place. It is really, really important outside of that for clubs, I think, and they're probably losing out here is attracting players that play soccer, play GA, to try and encourage them to play rugby. There is a definite gap there, I would say, for participation in rugby, but everybody's trying to fend for themselves. Everybody's trying to get the highest participation rate and the most enjoyable program so that they can get these people to adult rugby and have the most successful team in their club. But I think that if you were trying to do both, it just would not be possible. We have students that would play a rugby match on a Saturday morning. Typically it would have been, maybe 10 years ago, a decision would have happened because the kick-off times were the same. Now we're kind of into a situation where the rugby might start earlier, so it might start kick-off at 9:30 or 10 a.m. The football or the Gaelic football or hurling has now been moved to the afternoon because they want to get access to the rugby players that they have as members in their club. So you could be talking a 2 p.m. throw in or whatever, and then the following day they might play soccer. And I've had specific, like, extreme critical incidents kind of that I have in some of the papers that I'm writing at the moment, where they play a rugby match, they play a soccer match, they play a GA match all on Saturday, and then the next day they play 2 matches. They double up on an age group. And I'm going, this is extreme in terms of, like, training load. It's extreme because not only on the physical side, like, as in, where's the time to be a kid there? Like, where's the time to go out on your bike with the lads and, chill out and do, kid activities, things that are enjoyable outside of sport, that you're less social time. Like, we've reported back, some of the challenges of playing multi-sport, some of the highest kind of things that came back in our initial survey was less motivation, higher training times, less social time, and they're leading into a lot of issues that I would see at 14 and 15 in terms of psychological things that are occurring, where they just don't have time to be a kid anymore.
Would you say it's probably the best players who are most at risk of having to cope with all these demands?
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to what I was saying. Is this guy a good athlete because he played lots of sports when he was younger? Or is he getting picked up by all of these different coaches and clubs, and our mammy and daddy dropping him off to these little areas because they've seen he's technically good at one sport, and they go, maybe he's going to be good at this one, and maybe there's an opportunity to gain, elite status in this sport. It is hard to know, but it definitely, to your point, the best players in the majority of those kind of invasion ball sports there's a huge amount of transferable skills. They definitely are thriving in a lot of different sports. Hurling, not so much. It is, you've played yourself, it is one of those sports when, if you drop out for 3 or 4 months and try to come back to play championship because you're an elite player, unless you're physically dominant or physically more mature, the touch, the first touch, the striking left and right, the sharpness, kind of, it is tricky to kind of keep that up. Whereas, like, we've had last year, I coached the under-14s in the school, and we had 128 players in total, and the average age of where they took up rugby was 11.1 years of age. So we would have had a huge amount of people that the first time they touched a rugby ball was at 13 or 12. And the only reason that they're able to survive is because they probably played a lot of ball sports. Basketball, Gaelic football, no doubt, is probably the number one in terms of the transferable skills to rugby. Like, it isn't, there's no way that these guys will be able to just pick up a rugby ball and be able to, within 3-4 months, compete against elite schools. I know it's 13, we shouldn't be using that word, but, like, at the very top level of youth sport in Ireland in rugby, they're able to be competitive. It's not that I'm doing some amazing program where I'm a brilliant coach and they're closing the gap in that space of time. They are good athletes. They are great fundamental movement skills. They have a lot of the basic things that you need to be a decent rugby player. So there is that element where they are getting pulled and dragged to different pitches. And I suppose the tricky part for a parent is the competition schedules. It's how do you manage, little Johnny loves all of these different sports, but there comes a point where you're probably going to have to step in and say, are we really able to continue to do this? I know that Phil Carney released a paper on the affluency of multi-sport athletes, that, it's expensive. It is expensive to be in Dublin, to be a member of all of these clubs, to drive around to all these places, to go south side to north side to play away matches. It is a hell of a lot of commitment from parents. They probably have jobs that are very flexible. They probably have high salaries. They probably have a lot of resource to be able to drive them around, and a lot of commitment time-wise to be able to keep all of these multi-sports going,
Have you looked all males, or is there a mix of male female nowadays?
we haven't looked at any of the female stuff, and that's kind of for the next person, I suppose. The future research is definitely there is a huge amount that needs to be looked into there. Like even Sport Ireland's participation rate studies and stuff that have come out in the last year or two. Like the way I would have seen it when I was a kid, in terms of what are the most popular sports, is different now. There's soccer are doing a lot of good things in terms of they must be, because they have such high participation rates. Female soccer, like I live quite close to Peamount here in Newcastle, and they have phenomenal amount of teams, female teams at the moment. The Camogie Association, a lot of clubs are now joining as one. I know my own home club, Nave Breed, have joined as one club. I think there's a lot of good stuff there. It makes it more manageable and all under the one umbrella. There is probably potential for less overlap of training, less conflict between coaches pulling from the same players. I think one of the areas of the research that hasn't really been looked into, like we're probably the first people to look into real-time experience of what's happening to somebody that is getting close to specialization or that is competing in multiple sports. The context that I have in South Dublin is drastically different to rural Kerry, for example. That we have to have a look and see what's going to happen here, particularly now that you look at soccer is going to become a summer sport. What impact is that going to have on participation rates of rural clubs? Where St. Mullins, for example, in your own club, like what impact is that going to have? Male, female. What is the cultural context? Like, for example, we have a rugby school. It is the highest participation rate of any sport in the school. But surrounding us, we have, let's call them huge power clubs in terms of the members that they would have in GA. You have St. Jude's hurling football, Ballybod and St. Enda's hurling football. You've got Fogs, you've got Temple Oak Sing Street. We have students from Kilmacud Crokes. You've got a huge amount there, and then you're getting into the League of Ireland clubs as well, that there's a huge amount of League of Ireland clubs there as well,
I find from a female point of view it's more pronounced. The best female players are just pulled in so many directions, and it also seems to get more serious at a younger age. And I'm doing a study on development squads and stuff at the minute, look at male female differences and stuff there, and it's just there's just more freedom to do an awful lot more there. I can't give away too much on that. The summer soccer point you made there, like back, I live in South Kilkenny now. In St. Mullins, I see that as having very, very little difference. There is the bare minimum of football, there's the bare minimum of soccer, there's no soccer club in the parish. It's very much hurling focused in terms of cultural context. Here, where I am now, I know like same coaching officer at the Camogie club, and there's constant communication between the under 14 manager at the Camogie and under 14 manager at the local soccer, and they purposely find out when you train, when you're matches, we will avoid those. A colleague in work, and I know he listens to this, he was saying when in Waterford City they changed to summer soccer, the under 10 or under 11 hurling team he coaches, his players play with 7 different soccer clubs. Like the reality of trying to manage hurling training around that, and even if he was to ring all the coaches, the chances of all 7 of them being on board, yeah, definitely, let's all work together on this. It's just there's too many people, there's too many moving parts there. It's a pity at like 10 or 11 that some are going to be forced into making a decision purely because of a scheduling clash, regardless of the potential mindset of coaches who might be influencing them towards a single sport approach at that age. I think this is an important point now to jump across that. If playing multiple sports, what are the benefits of that? I know you've come from a multiple sport background, so if you want to give your background, what led you into this, or start with the benefits and branch out, you can take it either direction here.
Yeah, like I suppose my background would be I've played inter-county hurling, played inter-county football at underage. I would have done the whole FAI emerging talent program, national kind of underage kind of development stuff. Done the trials, overseas in Aston Villa and stuff like that, and played with some decent soccer players in my time. But I would have played senior A colleges football in Knockbeg College, which would have been, you know, equivalent, I suppose, to what we do in Terranor. It's a very intense program, and it's the most serious sport. I suppose I ended up, for want of a better phrase, on the scrap heap from all of this. You know, all of the probably overtraining, probably in hindsight looking back, you know, poor quality in terms of what we were doing, in terms of the experience for all of the different teams that I was kind of involved in. I was kind of being, you know, in an environment maybe for a few weeks, and then I'd be off to something else. And there's a term that we're kind of using in one of the papers called sport prioritization. And I think that fits my own personal profile when I was younger, was whatever was at the highest level of competitiveness at that time, I was on that field. I was trying to play that sport, whether it was the A college's basketball, I'd go and play that. Or when the college football was on, I'd go play that. And the second the minor championship was on, I'm all in on the hurling. And then I'm going soccer for the summer. And it was just constantly chasing whatever was the most competitive. And I see a lot of the students that I have in school where I am at the moment, it's quite similar, as in when the fail is on, they're all in on that. If there's a rugby competition coming up, they'll be getting involved with that and focusing their training in that. The benefits from, like, say, for my own study, or the reported benefits, I suppose that's really important, is what I would have perceived when I was a child, or what the participants that I'm researching at the moment, is nothing to do with, you know, anything that I would say academically is amazing or one of the really major benefits. It's their health. They're reporting they just want to be healthy. They're reporting that they just want to have fun, that they get to play lots of different games. They're also saying things like, I notice, you know, my transferable skills, that there is, you know, some benefits of playing this sport gives me a different skill for X. You know, some practical examples, the high fielding in Gaelic football for a back three player in rugby. Or we've had lots of people saying, you know, I'm in a rugby school, the S&C programme is really high level. When I go back to my club, I feel like I'm the strongest player. There's not really a whole lot being reported other than that. You know, there's, on the specialization side, people that are saying, you know, I need to quit Gaelic this year because the rugby competition is coming up next year and I want to make the junior cup team, or I want to make the senior cup team. I might be less developed in my primary sport if I keep playing all of these other sports. So like I'm multi-sport is something that commonly will be said, but I'm a hurler. As in, I play the others, but I am a hurler. I identify as a hurler. And if I have to keep playing Gaelic and rugby in the off-season, I'm not going to be as developed in my primary sport, so I'm going to quit those. So sometimes it's not as simple as, oh, this is clashing, so I need to start quitting all these sports. There is a focus, there is an intent, they're smart, they are looking longer term. But on the other side of that, you have a lot of participants are saying, yeah, I can keep this going. I'm 14 now, I'm playing, 70% of our 14-year-olds are playing 3 or more sports. And they're kind of going, I can keep doing this into adulthood, like as in I can keep playing, you know, all of these at the one time. And it's, you know, the data that we have would suggest that is not probably the correct view, as in they just tend to drop off at 15, 16, and even at 18 we had, I think it was about 12 to 15 participants that were left that were still playing multi-sport. So it is slightly tricky, but yeah, I'm kind of gone off on a tangent there.
You're all right. I'll just circle in with, say, on my own PhD studies, I looked at, we found lower anxiety, lower depression, and the highest levels of well-being were in those who played 3 or more sports, and at least one of those is a team sport. So in the final round of focus groups, we dug into that a bit, and a lot of the benefits were, like, you're getting self-esteem benefits from, like, you get improvements of confidence from getting better at something. So if you're playing rugby and hurling and badminton or athletics, and you're getting, like, you know, you might tap out in your improvements for a little while at one, there's more room for improvement in another. So there's just more chances for the boost of confidence from getting better at something. And then they do cross over, like there are obvious benefits of just being more active in general. There was the broader social circles was a big help. And then there was the, if something went bad, like you go and you play, say Knockbig, he got knocked out of the Leinster Football Championship. If you've a basketball match with O'Loughlin the following week, it just takes your mind off it. I remember one girl said in an interview, it's a chance to atone for what had just went bad about you. Or like, if some people on your team take stuff too serious and they're a bit annoyed at you, you're away with a different group completely a few days later playing another sport. And it just helped. It stopped the lows from bringing you too down or getting all welled up in it or caught up in it. It just gave you a bit more of a broader personality. And then the same goes for, I suppose, for your movement. Your general movement skills or general athleticism is just a little bit broader from doing a few different movement challenges or solving different problems tactically within games as well.
We would have the similar kind of reported stuff there around, particularly with parents, the socioeconomic factors, you know, being part of different social groups, being different part of different class groups. You know, like for example, your stereotypical rugby program in a fee-paying rugby school is going to be way different to your GA club, and probably going to be way different to your soccer club, and being involved in all of those gives you a nice well-rounded kind of idea of the world. So there is definitely some stuff there that is really interesting.
I'm just pausing the conversation with Petey here, as the next section we delved in a bit more detail into one topic in isolation, and I feel that deserves a full podcast episode on its own. We looked at how Petey has looked at redefining success in youth sport in his current role as Director of Rugby at Terranure Rugby, and the far-reaching benefits that's had, not just on results and success on the pitch, but in the wider environment in the school. I also just want to give two brief examples there around what I've talked about so far and how sport can be so important, and there's so many benefits, not just physically. Of one example of when I was in teaching practice back in 2010, 2011, I had a retired school principal as my teaching placement supervisor, person judged me, coming in and inspecting my lessons and all. He was a retired school principal, and he said back in the late 90s, early 90s, he took over in a school that wouldn't have had a great name, say, and he said he was going to use sport as a driver to change how the students felt about themselves and about their school. He targeted 3 sports in particular: hurling, because it was in a county where hurling was quite strong; soccer, because the majority of them played it in some form, not necessarily with clubs, outside the school, so there was a low barrier to entry in terms of getting everyone involved and playing and feeling some degree of success. But he also looked at badminton, because it was probably the easiest to get all males and all females in a mixed school playing as early as possible, and there's quite a low barrier to entry to badminton. Not to say it's not really good and skillful at the top end, but most can play it quite early on. That helped bring a lot of pride to the school through the students themselves, but also to who they're representing. Helped channel a lot of energy, it helped more see bought in, and those who are traditionally good at one particularly popular sport then could see other students who were good at other stuff, and it allowed for both males and females to develop. They went on and won numerous All-Irelands in badminton, and one player won All-Ireland in badminton, played minor inter-county for his county, and went on to be a senior national soccer player for Ireland. A more recent example then was, I was chatting to a school principal, he's chairman at a local athletics club, and he said again, a school that would have struggled to hold on to numbers and everything, he wanted to develop more pride in the school, and he challenged not just sport but extracurricular activity in general. And he said just the happiness in the school at the end of the year, he just saw a huge change there, and I asked what was that down to. He said we got 97% of students to engage in extracurricular activities this year. And instead of just the constant, let's focus on exams, let's focus on results, let's focus on all the other benefits we can get from being active in school. Most of it was sport, but there were other numerous activities again. And that just shows the power of a number of activities that adolescents, teenagers, children can do, and how it can benefit them in a number of ways. Again, just want to reiterate how the second part of this episode with Peter will be out next week. It's one of the most immersive conversations I've had with someone. Just being able to listen in and find out so many huge benefits and positives that they've had from a youth sport programme. And I think it can be applied to any amount of other sports there. Obviously, the majority of people who listen to this are from GA backgrounds, and you'll definitely find things you can go back, question some of the things you're doing and see how you can make them better through some of the things that PT outlines. Again, that'll be released next week. It'll be about similar length to this week's episode.